Black CEO mocked by real estate mogul's wife, then a ruthless $7.9 billion payback hit. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. You don't belong in this room. People like you never do. The words were sharp, public, and intentional, fired across the glass-walled conference hall like a slap meant to echo. Cameras were already rolling. Microphones hovered inches from polished mouths. The skyline loomed behind them, an uninterrupted wall of steel and ambition, crowned by the silhouette of a single tower valued at nearly $8 billion. At the podium stood Evelyn Hart, dressed in red, posture rigid with entitlement, finger extended like a verdict. She didn't shout out of anger. She shouted out of certainty, the kind that comes from never being questioned. Across from her, framed by the cold blue light of the room, stood Naomi Carter. Black. Calm. Silent. She wore white, not soft, not ornamental, but architectural. Clean lines. No jewelry that begged for attention. A slim black portfolio rested against her side, untouched. She did not flinch when Evelyn spoke. She did not blink when the room inhaled. You think you can just walk in here, Evelyn continued, voice dripping with condescension, and lay claim to something you couldn't possibly understand? This tower, she gestured sharply to the skyline, to the building that pierced the clouds behind them, was built by people with vision. With pedigree. Not by outsiders. A murmur rippled through the audience. Lawyers in tailored suits shifted their weight. Board members glanced at one another, unsure whether to intervene or let the spectacle continue. This was supposed to be a routine press briefing. A formality. Instead, it had turned into theater. Naomi remained still. If Evelyn noticed the stillness, she mistook it for weakness. You should be grateful we even let you stand here, Evelyn added. But don't confuse proximity with power. You will never touch this tower. Never. That was the moment the room tipped, not loudly, but irreversibly. Naomi lifted her gaze, slow and deliberate, meeting Evelyn's eyes for the first time. There was no anger in them. No embarrassment. What stared back was something colder. Calculated. Patient. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi Carter. The men standing behind Evelyn, legal counsel, senior executives, gatekeepers of billion-dollar decisions, watched Naomi now with renewed attention. Not because she had spoken, but because she hadn't. Evelyn scoffed, misreading the silence. See, she said, half laughing into the microphones. Not a word. That's what happens when ambition outruns reality. A few nervous chuckles followed. Phones lifted slightly higher. Someone in the back whispered, "Who is she again?" Naomi shifted her weight, the faintest movement, controlled and precise. The portfolio in her hand didn't open. She didn't rush to explain herself. She had learned long ago that explanations were a tax demanded only from those without leverage. The moderator cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hart, perhaps we should." "No," Evelyn snapped. "Let her hear it. Let everyone hear it." She turned back to Naomi, eyes narrowing. "This deal is over. Whatever fantasy you walked in with, it ends today." Naomi finally spoke. Her voice was quiet. Almost inconveniently so. "I wasn't here to ask," she said. The words landed softly. Too softly for some. But not for everyone. One of the attorneys behind Evelyn stiffened. Another glanced down at his phone, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Somewhere in the room, a breath caught. Evelyn laughed again, louder this time. Of course you were, she said. People like you always are. Naomi's expression didn't change. She looked past Evelyn, now past the podium, past the cameras to the tower itself. The glass giant reflected the room back at them, red and white, power and assumption, noise and restraint. What no one in that room understood not yet was that Naomi Carter had been underestimated before. Often. Deliberately. And every time, the mistake had been expensive. She adjusted her grip on the portfolio, not opening it, just grounding herself in its weight. The room buzzed with anticipation, unaware that the balance of power had already begun to shift. Because the woman they had just mocked wasn't fighting for access. She was standing at the edge of a decision that would determine who walked out owning the skyline and who walked out with nothing but their voice echoing in an empty room. The silence that followed her words didn't last long. It never does in rooms built on entitlement. A man near the edge of the stage leaned toward another and whispered, not quietly enough, "Is she with legal?" "No," the other replied, eyes scanning Naomi from head to toe. "Maybe an advisor. Or someone's assistant." The word assistant drifted through the room like permission. Evelyn caught it. She always did. She straightened, visibly reassured by the murmurs aligning with her version of reality. "Let's be clear," she said, turning slightly toward the cameras, reclaiming the narrative. "This briefing concerns ownership, not opinions. And certainly not unsolicited interference." Naomi remained where she was. Still. Balanced. As if the floor beneath her had been measured and reinforced long before she stepped onto it. The moderator glanced down at his notes again, then up at her. "Ms. Carter, was it?" he asked, already uncertain. "Are you affiliated with any of the parties listed in the disclosure?" The phrasing mattered. Affiliated. Not leading. Not controlling. Naomi met his gaze. "I am," she said simply. "With whom?" Evelyn pressed, cutting in. "Because I don't see your name on any of the filings. And trust me," she smiled thinly, "I would remember." A few heads nodded. This was familiar ground. Paperwork. Titles. Lists. The language of exclusion dressed as procedure. Naomi didn't reach for the microphone. She didn't interrupt. She let the moment stretch, watching as the room decided quietly, collectively what role it wanted her to play. Someone in the second row leaned back and crossed his arms. "If she were important, we'd know," he muttered. Another voice, lower. "Probably a consultant. They always show up late." Behind Evelyn, one of the attorneys shifted again, discomfort creeping into his posture. He had stopped looking at Naomi's face and started watching her hands. The portfolio. Still closed. Still untouched. Experience had taught him that people who needed to prove something opened folders quickly. Evelyn noticed his distraction and frowned. "Is there a problem?" she asked him sharply. "No," he said too fast. "Just protocol." Protocol. The word landed like a shield. Evelyn turned back to Naomi, satisfied. "You see how this works," she said. "Rooms like this run on structure. On records. Not on confidence." Naomi inclined her head, just a fraction. "Not in submission. In acknowledgement." "I understand structure," she said. Evelyn laughed. "Do you?" She gestured broadly toward the skyline again. "Because that tower behind us? It didn't rise on understanding. It rose on capital. On legacy. On families who've been shaping this city for generations. Naomi followed her gaze to the glass spire cutting through the clouds. The reflection of the room shimmered across its surface, faces confident, uncertain, curious, blind. Legacy, Naomi repeated. Yes, Evelyn said, pleased. Legacy. Something you don't build by accident. There it was. The line drawn clean and sharp. Naomi felt it settle not as an insult, but as confirmation. The room had already decided she was a visitor. What they couldn't see, what they had never learned to recognize, was the difference between someone seeking access and someone auditing outcomes. Naomi shifted her stance slightly, redistributing her weight. The movement was subtle, but it caught the attorney's eye again. He glanced down at his phone. Then back up. His jaw tightened. Evelyn continued, emboldened. I think we've indulged this long enough, she said. Security will escort. No, Naomi said. Not loud. Not sharp. Just present. The word cut through the air more effectively than shouting ever could. Evelyn froze, momentarily startled. Excuse me. Naomi looked at her, not with challenge, not with defiance, but with something closer to evaluation. That won't be necessary. A pause. Cameras adjusted. Someone coughed. Evelyn's expression hardened. You don't get to decide that. Naomi's gaze flicked, briefly, to the men behind her. To the attorney. To the executive who had stopped smiling. To the moderator whose notes suddenly felt insufficient. I don't usually, Naomi said. But today isn't usual. The attorney's phone vibrated again. This time, he didn't ignore it. He read the message. Once. Twice. Color drained from his face. He leaned toward Evelyn, lowering his voice. We may need a moment. Evelyn waved him off without looking. Later, she snapped. Handle this. He hesitated. Then tried again. Evelyn. Now. That got her attention. She turned, irritated. What? He swallowed. There's been an update. Naomi didn't watch them. She didn't need to. She already knew the moment had passed, the moment when being underestimated was no longer safe. Because isolation was never the endgame. It was the setup. And the room that had just decided Naomi Carter didn't belong was about to learn how expensive that decision could be. The room didn't erupt. It recalibrated. That was the difference Naomi Carter had learned to recognize early in her career, the moment when a space stopped reacting emotionally and started adjusting strategically. Chairs shifted. Voices lowered. Eyes moved from faces to screens. Evelyn Hart stood frozen for half a second too long. Her attorney stepped closer now, no longer trying to hide his concern. He angled his body away from the cameras, whispering urgently. We need to pause. There's a discrepancy in the capital stack. Evelyn hissed back, this is not the time. It is, he replied, barely moving his lips. Because it's live. Naomi watched none of this directly. She focused instead on the glass wall behind the podium, on the tower rising outside like a blade embedded in the sky. She remembered standing at a different window years ago, much smaller, much dirtier, being told her projections were ambitious in the polite way men said impossible. She had learned then that power rarely announced itself. It waited. The moderator cleared his throat again, voice tighter now. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief. Why? Evelyn snapped, turning back to the microphones, forcing her smile into place. There's nothing to clarify. Ownership has been settled. Naomi finally moved. She stepped forward, not toward the podium, but to its side. A small shift, but one that subtly changed the frame. Cameras followed instinctively. They always did when stillness gave way to intention. Ownership, Naomi said, calmly, is rarely settled. It's maintained. Evelyn scoffed. You speak as if you're involved. I am, Naomi replied. This time, she didn't let the word hang alone. I've been involved for 18 months. A low murmur rippled through the room. That wasn't the kind of timeline outsiders claimed. That was the language of diligence. Of committees. Of patience. The attorney behind Evelyn closed his eyes briefly. Evelyn laughed again, but the sound cracked. 18 months doing what? Watching from the sidelines. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Structuring outcomes. The phrase landed differently. Less like bravado. More like process. She reached into her portfolio not to display anything yet, just to retrieve a pen. She rolled it once between her fingers, grounding the motion, then slid the portfolio closed again. Still not opening it. The men behind Evelyn exchanged looks now. One of them leaned toward another. Didn't the Whitmore refinancing come in late last quarter? Yes, came the reply. Bridge Capital. Quiet. Naomi heard them. She always did. People assumed calm meant distraction. It never had. Evelyn's confidence thinned visibly. You're speaking in abstractions, she said sharply. This isn't philosophy. This is real estate. Naomi nodded. Exactly. She looked out at the audience, developers, financiers, reporters' faces trained to read numbers before people. Real estate isn't about buildings, she continued. It's about timing. And pressure. The attorney's phone vibrated again. He didn't hesitate this time. He stepped away, answering in a low voice. His shoulders stiffened. Evelyn noticed. What is happening? She demanded. He ended the call and leaned back in, pale. The escrow partner has flagged a change. The liquidity source. Stop, Evelyn snapped. You're embarrassing us. Naomi spoke again, her tone unchanged. No one is embarrassing you. She paused, deliberate. You're just being introduced to reality. The room went quiet not because Naomi had raised her voice, but because she hadn't. The kind of quiet that followed facts, not threats. Evelyn stared at her now, really stared. Who are you? She asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Naomi held her gaze. I'm the reason this meeting was delayed twice last spring, she said. I'm the reason your lenders stopped returning calls in July. And I'm the reason your attorneys keep saying we just need one more week. Each sentence was delivered evenly. No emphasis. No flourish. The effect was devastating. Evelyn took a step back without realizing she had moved. Naomi didn't advance. She didn't need to. Because the room had already begun to shift away from noise, away from assumption, toward the woman who had never needed to announce her authority to exercise it. This wasn't the reveal. Not yet. This was the moment before it. The moment when isolation stopped being a weapon against her and became the silence before collapse. The room was no longer neutral. It had chosen a direction, and it wasn't Evelyn Hart's. She felt it in the way the audience leaned forward now, not toward the podium, but toward Naomi. In the way the attorney behind her had stopped trying to interrupt and started trying to calculate. In the way silence no longer protected her authority, it exposed it. Evelyn straightened, forcing herself back into posture. Enough, she said sharply. This is turning into speculation, and I won't allow it. Naomi didn't respond immediately. She waited. That, more than anything, unsettled Evelyn. You keep speaking as if you have standing here, Evelyn continued, her voice rising despite her effort to contain it. But you don't. You're not on the board. You're not listed as a partner. And you certainly don't own anything behind me. She gestured again toward the tower, more aggressively this time, as if pointing could make ownership permanent. You will never touch this building, Evelyn said. Never. People like you don't end up on deeds like that. They clean up after the people who do. The words landed hard. Not because they were loud but because they crossed a line no one could pretend not to see. A collective inhale swept through the room. A reporter's pen froze mid-scratch. Someone near the back whispered, "Did she just?" Naomi felt the shift in her chest, not anger, not shock, but clarity. This was it. The sentence Evelyn would never be able to walk back. Naomi looked at her fully now. Not as an adversary. As a case study. That, Naomi said quietly, was unnecessary. Evelyn scoffed. Truth usually is to people who don't want to hear it. Naomi nodded once, as if confirming something for herself. She turned slightly toward the moderator. Are we still on record? The moderator hesitated, glancing at the producers behind the cameras. Yes, he said carefully. We are. Good, Naomi replied. The attorney behind Evelyn stiffened. Naomi, he started, then stopped himself, realizing he'd used her first name. Evelyn's head snapped toward him. Why did you call her that? He didn't answer. Naomi reached into her portfolio at last. The movement was unhurried. Intentional. The kind of motion that signaled preparation, not reaction. She withdrew a single document and placed it on the podium, not facing the cameras, but facing the people who mattered. Evelyn laughed, brittle. What is this? More theatrics? Naomi didn't look at her. She addressed the room. 3 months ago, she said, a restructuring agreement was executed under a holding entity based in Delaware. Quietly. No press. No announcements. Several heads snapped up. 1 month ago, she continued, that entity acquired controlling interest in the mezzanine debt attached to this tower. The attorney's breath caught audibly. Evelyn's smile faltered. That's not possible. Naomi finally met her eyes again. It is, she said. Because I authorized it? The room broke. Not into chaos but into understanding. Whispers surged. Phones lit up. Someone near the front whispered, mezzanine control means whoever holds it decides who survives the refinancing, another finished. Evelyn took a step back. You're lying, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. You're bluffing. Naomi shook her head slowly. I don't bluff with numbers. She tapped the document once. You assumed ownership was visible. Loud. Public. You assumed power introduced itself. Naomi leaned slightly closer, not threatening, just present. That assumption, she said, is why this conversation is happening. Evelyn's attorney leaned in, panic no longer hidden. Evelyn, he whispered urgently, we need to stop this. Evelyn turned on him. Stop what? He swallowed. The broadcast. The briefing. Everything. Naomi straightened, reclaiming her space without moving an inch. You were right about one thing, she said to Evelyn, her voice steady. This tower didn't rise by accident. She paused. It rose because people underestimated who was willing to wait. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was recognition. Because everyone in that room now understood, the moment Evelyn had tried to humiliate Naomi, she hadn't been defending power. She had been handing it over. No one interrupted her now. Not the moderator. Not the attorneys. Not Evelyn. The room had crossed a threshold, the point where pretending ignorance was no longer strategic. Naomi let the document rest on the podium without turning it toward the cameras. That choice was deliberate. This wasn't a reveal for the public yet. It was a correction for the people who understood what they were looking at. She addressed them directly. Control, Naomi said, doesn't come from what your name is on. It comes from what breaks if you say no. A few executives exchanged glances. One of them, silver-haired, Cautious cleared his throat. If what you're implying is accurate, he said carefully, then the refinancing scheduled for next quarter won't close, Naomi finished. Not as structured. Evelyn's hands curled into fists. This is insane, she said. Even if you hold mezzanine debt, that doesn't give you ownership. Naomi nodded. No. It gives me leverage. She paused, letting the distinction settle. And leverage, she continued, is what decides who keeps ownership when the market stops being polite. The attorney behind Evelyn finally stepped forward, abandoning discretion. Ms. Carter, he said, voice tight, with all due respect, you're forcing a destabilization that could expose what's already unstable, Naomi replied. She turned slightly, including the audience now. This tower has been propped up by extensions, bridge loans, and optimism dressed as confidence. Everyone here knows that. No one disagreed. Because they did. Naomi's tone remained even, almost instructional. The question was never whether the Whitmore Group built this tower. The question was whether they could keep it. Evelyn shook her head, disbelief giving way to fear. You planned this, she said. This whole thing, you planned it? Naomi met her gaze. I prepared for it. There was a difference. One of the board members leaned toward another, whispering urgently. If she holds mezzanine, she can block senior restructuring. And force a sale, the other replied. Or worse. Evelyn heard them now. All of them. The whispers she used to command had turned against her. You can't do this alone, Evelyn said, desperation creeping into her voice. Deals like this require consensus. Naomi smiled faintly, not with satisfaction, but with inevitability. They require consent, she corrected. Consensus is optional. She tapped the document again. And consent, she added, has been revoked. The moderator shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Carter, are you announcing a position here today? Naomi considered the question. No, she said. I'm acknowledging one. She turned slightly, giving the cameras a clean angle now, not dramatic, just clear. As of this morning, the controlling interest in the mezzanine structure tied to this tower is held by a private investment entity under my direction. The room buzzed. This time, openly. Evelyn staggered back a step, her composure finally fracturing. This isn't over, she said weakly. You don't understand the consequences. Naomi regarded her calmly. I understand them precisely. She leaned in just enough for Evelyn to hear, her voice low, controlled. You thought humiliation would put me in my place. She straightened. It revealed yours. Silence fell, not stunned, not chaotic, but final. The tower outside reflected the room back at itself, faces pale, calculating, suddenly aware that the ground beneath their assumptions had shifted. Naomi closed her portfolio at last. The sound was soft. Decisive. This briefing, she said evenly, can continue. She paused. But the outcome has already changed. And for the first time since the cameras started rolling, everyone in that room understood exactly who had been mistaken and how costly that mistake was about to become. Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She reached into her portfolio one final time and removed her phone, placing it flat on the podium. The screen lit up not with messages, not with headlines, but with a single name at the top of a secure line. The attorney noticed first. His breath caught. No, he whispered. Evelyn followed his gaze, confusion tightening into panic. What are you doing? She demanded. Naomi didn't look at her. She pressed the call button. It rang once. Twice. Then connected. Yes, Naomi said calmly. Proceed. The word wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it carried the unmistakable weight of authority, the kind that moved money, not opinions. Around the room, phones began to vibrate almost in unison. Executives glanced down. One board member's face went pale as he read a notification. Another stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "What's happening?" Evelyn asked, her voice cracking despite her effort to hold it steady. Naomi ended the call and finally turned to face her. "I'm enforcing the terms you assumed were theoretical," she said. The attorney stepped forward, abandoning all pretense. "Ms. Carter," he said urgently, "if you execute this now, you trigger cross-defaults across 3 entities." Naomi nodded. "I know. You'll freeze operations," he continued. "Construction halts. Credit lines collapse. Lenders panic." "Yes," Naomi said again. Evelyn stared at her. "You're trying to destroy us." Naomi shook her head slowly. "No. I'm letting the structure respond to pressure." The room buzzed no longer with whispers, but with alarms. A junior executive rushed to the back, phone pressed to his ear. Another was already typing, fingers shaking. One of the board members finally spoke, voice strained. "She's calling the option," he said quietly. "She's terminating the extension." Evelyn's knees buckled slightly. She reached for the edge of the podium to steady herself. "That extension keeps the tower solvent," she said. "You can't just." "I can," Naomi replied. "Because it was written that way." She picked up her phone again, scrolling briefly, then set it down. "The bridge financing expires at noon tomorrow," she continued. "There will be no renewal. No grace period. No courtesy calls." The attorney swallowed hard. "That forces an immediate review." "It forces accountability," Naomi corrected. The moderator attempted to interject. "Ms. Carter, for clarity, are you announcing a withdrawal?" Naomi considered the wording. "I'm announcing a correction," she said. "Effective immediately." Evelyn's voice rose, sharp and desperate. "You can't do this publicly." Naomi really looked at her now. "You made it public," she said. "When you mistook humiliation for leverage." A heavy silence followed. Outside, the tower stood unchanged, glass gleaming, steel unbothered. Inside, everything that supported it was unraveling. Phones rang openly now. No one bothered to step away. One executive muttered, "Lenders are already calling." Another said, "The rating agencies just flagged it." Evelyn turned to her attorney, her composure gone. "Fix this," she said. "Do something." He stared back at her, hollow. "There's nothing to fix," he said quietly. "She holds the switch." Naomi closed her portfolio and stepped back from the podium. She didn't linger. She didn't watch the collapse with satisfaction. "This was avoidable," she said, almost gently. "All you had to do was stop talking." Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Naomi turned toward the exit. Cameras tracked her movement instinctively, but she didn't acknowledge them. Her work wasn't for the audience. As she walked, another notification buzzed across the room, then another. The sound layered, a cascade of consequences arriving all at once. At the door, Naomi paused, not for effect, but because precision mattered. She looked back once. "The tower will still be here tomorrow," she said. "The question is who will be standing with it." Then she left. Behind her, the room erupted, not in shouting, but in frantic motion. Calls. Orders. Damage control. And through it all, the truth settled inescapably over everyone present. The $7.9 billion payback hadn't arrived with fury. It had arrived with a single word. Naomi's footsteps faded down the corridor, but the consequences stayed. Inside the conference hall, time fractured. Phones rang without pause, now sharp, insistent tones slicing through the stunned quiet. No one tried to silence them. There was no decorum left to protect. Evelyn stood at the podium as if it might anchor her, hands gripping its edges, knuckles whitening. The cameras were still live. She knew that. Everyone did. But the room had stopped performing for the audience and started scrambling for survival. "Shut the feed," Evelyn snapped, turning toward the production crew. "Now." A producer hesitated, headset pressed tight to his ear. "We can't," he said. "This is a scheduled briefing." Pulling it would. "Do it," she barked. Behind her, the attorney shook his head, barely perceptible. "It's too late," he murmured. "They're already running alerts." On a screen near the back, a financial ticker refreshed. Then refreshed again. A quiet gasp rippled through the room. One of the board members leaned forward, reading aloud before he could stop himself. "Credit review initiated, lenders reassessing exposure, possible downgrade pending." Evelyn turned on him. "Stop reading that." But the damage was done. Another phone buzzed. Then another. A junior executive answered his and went pale. "They've suspended the draw," he whispered. "All of it?" The attorney closed his eyes. "That triggers the clause," he said. "We're in breach." Evelyn laughed short, brittle, unrecognizable. "This is fear," she said, as much to herself as to anyone else. "They're bluffing. They always bluff." "No," the attorney replied quietly. "She doesn't." The moderator, forgotten until now, cleared his throat with visible strain. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, attempting order, "we are going to adjourn." A reporter stood. "Is it true the mezzanine holder has exercised termination rights?" Another voice followed. "Is the tower at risk of forced sale?" A third, sharper. "Mrs. Hart, did you misrepresent the capital structure?" Evelyn's head snapped up. "Absolutely not." But even she could hear it the way her certainty had thinned. The attorney stepped forward, lowering his voice, urgent and raw. "Evelyn, listen to me. We need to stop speaking. Every word right now creates liability." She stared at him, disbelief etched across her face. "You're telling me to be quiet?" "I'm telling you," he said, "that she's already won this round." The word "won" landed like a blow. Across the room, executives were no longer whispering. They were negotiating in real-time quiet deals, emergency calls, contingency plans unraveling before the audience's eyes. One man turned away from the podium entirely, phone pressed tight to his ear. "We need an extension," he hissed. "Any extension." A pause. His shoulders slumped. No, I understand." Another shook his head slowly, staring at the skyline as if it had betrayed him. "She didn't touch the building," he muttered. "She touched the timeline." Evelyn heard that one. Her gaze drifted to the glass wall, to the tower Naomi had referenced so calmly. For the first time, it didn't look invincible. It looked exposed, an asset balanced on assumptions she had mistaken for permanence. "This is extortion," Evelyn said suddenly, louder than necessary. "She humiliated us. This is retaliation." The attorney turned to her, his expression steady but final. "No," he said. "This is structure responding to pressure." A murmur of agreement passed through the room. The cameras kept rolling. Somewhere, producers debated whether to cut away. Somewhere else, headlines were already being drafted. Evelyn's phone vibrated in her hand. She stared at it as if it might explode. She answered. "Yes." Her voice wavered. She straightened, forcing control. "What do you mean, how bad?" Her face drained of color. "No," she said softly. "That can't be right." The attorney watched her, dread settling in. "Who is it?" he asked. She lowered the phone slowly. "Our primary lender," she whispered. "They're stepping back." The room went still. "Stepping back," someone repeated. "From what?" Evelyn swallowed. "From everything." That was the moment the collapse became public. Reporters surged forward. Questions overlapped. The moderator gave up entirely, stepping aside as the room dissolved into chaos. Outside, the tower still stood proud, gleaming, unchanged. Inside, the Whitmore empire was folding in real time. And as the live feed continued, one truth became unavoidable. Naomi Carter hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't issued threats. She hadn't needed to humiliate anyone. She had simply withdrawn permission. And in rooms built on assumption, that was enough to bring everything down. The fallout didn't arrive with sirens. It arrived with emails. By the next morning, the tower was still standing, but everything beneath it had shifted. Construction crews were told to pause. Consultants were dismissed with polite urgency. Lenders stopped returning calls they had once answered within minutes. Quietly, methodically, the Whitmore Group was being hollowed out. Inside a private boardroom 3 floors below the original briefing, Evelyn sat without speaking. Her red dress from the day before hung over the back of her chair like a discarded flag. Across the table, attorneys spoke in controlled tones, choosing their words carefully now. "The extension is officially terminated," one said. "The bridge loan has been called," another added. "And the mezzanine holder is refusing renegotiation." No one needed to say her name. Naomi Carter never appeared in the room again. She didn't need to. Her presence was everywhere, in the frozen accounts, in the clauses suddenly enforced, in the calendar deadlines that no longer moved for legacy or reputation. By afternoon, a confidential notice circulated through the market: strategic restructuring pending. Asset disposition under review. Translated, it meant one thing. The tower would change hands. Evelyn stared at the city through the window, the skyline she had once pointed to with certainty now feeling distant, indifferent. "She did this to make a point," she said bitterly. An attorney corrected her gently. "She did this because the structure allowed it." Elsewhere, in a quieter office across town, Naomi reviewed the same tower on a different screen, numbers clean, timelines aligned. She signed nothing dramatic. Issued no statements. Just one instruction, sent securely and without flourish. Proceed with acquisition review. Justice didn't arrive loudly. It arrived on schedule. And for the first time, the people who had mistaken proximity for power understood the difference, too late to matter, but early enough to remember. The tower never changed. It rose the same way it always had, glass catching the morning light, steel cutting clean lines into the sky. From the outside, nothing about it suggested loss or victory. But ownership rarely announces itself. 2 weeks later, the briefing room reopened. No cameras this time. No podium. Just a long table, a set of finalized documents, and a quiet understanding among the people seated there. Naomi Carter arrived without ceremony. She wore the same restraint she always had, neutral tones, no spectacle. She didn't stand at the head of the table. She didn't need to. The room oriented itself around her naturally, the way rooms always do when power no longer has to prove itself. The final papers were slid across the table. She reviewed them once. Signed once. That was all. No speeches followed. No victory statements. Just a shift in responsibility so complete it felt almost invisible. Outside, the tower belonged to her now, not as a trophy, but as a system. A structure to be stabilized, corrected, carried forward. The same building. A different future. Later that afternoon, as the city moved on, someone asked Naomi a question she'd been asked her entire career. "How does it feel?" She paused, not for effect, but for accuracy. "It feels correct," she said. That was all. Because the point had never been revenge. It had never been humiliation. It had never been about being seen. It had been about dignity quietly enforced. The people who had mistaken her silence for weakness learned something that day. Not because she raised her voice. Not because she demanded respect. But because she withdrew access. And in a world built on assumption, that was the most powerful statement she could make. The tower still stood. Only the truth beneath it had changed.